Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Spranger. I'm the INN Network Philanthropy Prospect Researcher here at INN, and I just want to say thank you to coming to this session with the Trust Project. You are together with you building a more trusted and trustworthy press. I'm so grateful that the Trust Project is here. I want to thank them for being one of our silver sponsors with INN Days. Thanks to their help, we've been able to put together this amazing program for the past 2 days. We have Sally Lehrman from the Trust Project today. Do you want to take a minute before we start and tell us a little bit about the Trust Project?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And I will say we're just really proud and delighted to sponsor these days because INN is such a vital resource and you do such wonderful work. And what the Trust Project is, you said it, we are a consortium working to build a more trusted and trustworthy press. And you'll hear a bit more about this. We are large and small in nature. All kinds of news organizations participate, and also from around the globe. So just as a sense, on recent network calls, we had people from Sao Paulo, Madrid, London, Boise, Idaho, Orange County, California, and Toronto, Canada, and probably more. That's just a taste of who we are and what we do.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. We really appreciate your support. As you can see, we're also joined by Willa Crolius, a design researcher. Thanks so much. And Charity Brown, deputy editor of Newsroom Product and Digital News Projects at the Washington Post. So with that, I will hand it over to Sally, Willa, and Charity.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming. I know it's been a couple of days on being on Zoom, so thank you. Today we're really going to focus, or this session, we're going to focus on sharing some research from the Trust Project and then giving you an opportunity to work with it. So the intent is to have it be both learning and action oriented. So as I mentioned, the Trust Project works with news organizations around the world. Our core offering is the 8 trust indicators. And these 8 trust indicators collectively show who and what is behind the news, this news site. And the point is to help people more easily discern and distinguish between news with integrity, the kind of news that you're producing every day, and misinformation, disinformation, information that's just designed to sell you something. So really help promote the core purpose of journalism, to help people make decisions about their communities, their lives, and their governments. And then with each trust indicator, there also is associated markup to help the platforms do a better job surfacing trustworthy news. And so these trust indicators were developed through user-centered design. We went out and talk to people about what do they really want from news? Why do they value it? How do they decide when to trust it or not? And the work that was done in that original set was done by Christine Kurjan and also a couple of other researchers. Then they took that and we held workshops with senior news executives and tried to marry what we were learning from users with journalistic values. Again, so we can show this is what journalism is and does. And so now more than 225 sites around the world are showing these trust indicators on their pages. In Canada, every province in Canada, 6 countries in Europe, Latin America, and the US. And sites like the Washington Post, Charity's here from the Post, Orange County Register, Voice of Orange County, Wisconsin Watch. I also saw Yes Magazine is on this call, so also Yes is one of our sites. Now, a lot's happened, as you all know, in the last year or two, and so we decided it really was time to do an update on these trust indicators. We knew they worked. We've done some research in addition to that user research, looking at the trust indicators on the page. So we knew they worked, but we wanted to see how users were responding. And so again, Chris led the research and then Willa joined her, and they both volunteered their time, to which I'm super appreciative, and brought in some of their colleagues. And they spoke to 30 participants across race, class, gender, generation, geography, again, in many places throughout the world, and Willa will tell you more about that. Then we just recently completed 9 workshops in 3 languages looking at that research, and again, trying to figure out, well, how can we incorporate this and deepen this learning and deepen the trust indicators in the way we're using them. And so that's what we're going to share with you today, a little bit about that. And I'm going to start with introducing Willa, and then Charity will give a perspective from a news organization that's been participating with us from the very start, and also went to those workshops. And then together we're going to focus on this diverse voices trust indicator, which is one of the 8. So I'd like to introduce Willa. I'm just really thrilled to bring her to this group because she has such expertise in design research, and you should know about her. So she is a human-centered designer at Tata Consultancy Services, and she marries this background in industrial design and also user research. And just as a taste, she's worked on projects ranging from kind of community-oriented work, like historic sites and public parks, to products like medical equipment, furniture, websites, apps, and watches, lighting systems. And one of the reasons why I think she's really fun to work with is she does such a great job of engaging users and understanding their needs, and then connecting it with research and bringing people together who are, I guess, like our community and your community at INN, to think about, well, how can we really design in a way that users respond to and that meets their needs? And she's worked with clients such as a tire company, lighting company, National Endowments for the Arts, U.S. State Department, and even a newspaper, the Chicago Tribune. So with that, over to you, Willa, who's going to introduce you to the research that she and her colleagues just completed. So thank you again, Willa.
Thanks so much, Sally. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Great. So as Sally said, the refresh research we did was building upon the original work done back in 2016. And for this round, we did talk to people from all of these different places. We made sure we had a good, diverse perspective in terms of political leanings, but also making sure we're getting good gender sort of diversity, and also ethnic and how people are identifying. So making sure we're talking to a good large group of people. And to kind of start this, for those of you who don't know, these are the trust indicators as they are now. Sally, did you want to do a quick what each of them are?
Yeah, sure. So these are the 8 trust indicators, and as Willa mentioned, this came out of the research. And so the first is best practices, and it's just basically the guardrails around what makes journalism different from other kinds of information. So your ethics policies, corrections, when do you do those? How do you handle unnamed sources? Ownership, for instance. Journalist information responds to this request about, well, tell me more about who the journalist is. What is their expertise and background? Do they have the local knowledge? Do they have demographic knowledge or expertise? Citations and references, and we kind of combine that with methods. Those are both about respond to the question, how is this story built? Like, people want to know more about what the sources were, where the information came from. Type of work, labels. People felt that news was blending with opinion, and even journalists couldn't tell the difference. So now all of our sites provide these labels. Actionable feedback is about your public engagement. So really listening and responding to the public. Diverse voices. People wanted to hear from people both like themselves and unlike themselves in the news. And as they put it, not just from people at high levels of business and government. Locally sourced gets to wanting to know that the journalist really understood my community as a member of the public. Were they there? Did they understand me? And Willa will tell you a bit more on each of these.
Yeah, so even just starting with this slide, because the stars in the top layer, what we were hearing from people is that the top best practices, journalist info, citations and references, and types of work felt pretty stable still to most of the users we talked to recently. And then the bottom row was actually, we started getting into much more nuanced and kind of complex conversations. And particularly a lot of people were drawn to actionable feedback and really speaking about diverse voices and what can we do about that moving forward with these trust indicators. So out of the research, each person we interviewed, we created kind of like, it's almost like an elaborate, like a baseball card or something on each person we talked to, making sure we're highlighting individual news behaviors, what exactly are the types of news they're looking at, if they're subscribing or following to particular news, and if they're kind of call out quotes or they're responding particularly to one of the trust indicators. And then we also had some card sorting and elements that went into every interview. So we have a series of these for every user that we talked to that came out of the research that we brought into the workshop. But getting into kind of the main themes that pretty much everyone was talking about. The first one is how engagement in the news has changed kind of over the last 5 years. People were also talking a lot about emotion, and there's the emotion in how people are responding to the news, but then there's also emotion in how the news is being presented, which became a very complicated and complex conversation for people to kind of talk through how they're making choices, what they're engaging with, and how it's affecting them. And that kind of all fled into what is now this sort of future of the landscape of trust that users, that readers have an understanding of and would like more help with, basically. So diving deep a little bit more into engagement. So this is a diagram that we created. You can see all the little dots of all the people we've talked to. One of the main shifts that we saw that did happen over the last 4 years is that there seemed to be a much stronger movement towards more engagement in the news, which, if we think about it, kind of makes sense, particularly during the time that we were doing this research, because we had, the global pandemic was coming, so people were much more tuned in to, moment to moment news updates. Not to mention, the Black Lives Matter movement was happening in a big way in North America again, and in Europe was also much more, was aware of that, much more engaged in that as well. So, but we were able to kind of break out these sort of two main categories. There was really a strong group of people who were outwardly engaged, meaning, all of these people are actively looking at news quite a bit, but the outwardly engaged are actually sending out news articles that are interesting to them or they think particularly useful to even just larger groups, but also definitely family and friend networks and things like that. And then you've got an inwardly engaged group of people who are, again, very avidly looking at the news and engaging a lot with it, but really not sharing it and really not actually interested in sharing it. People brought up fear, literally fear that if they start sharing things, they might get major backlash if they accidentally shared something that maybe is not accurate or is misinformation. So they were, again, very avid, but not publicly. And then the other little element I've got here over to the right, another big element that was I found happened a lot more with people who fall in the internally engaged group. They would need to take breaks. News burnout was a conversation that came up over and over again during this research. People were making decisions to take weeks off from the news because that's mental health, they couldn't handle it, or they were making like rules for themselves. So I will not look at the news on Sunday. And I saw a lot of people really talking about that. Again, if you think about when this research was done, it continues to be around the world. A lot is going on right now. Now, the other kind of really big, interesting piece that I wanted to talk about was this question or this exploration around emotion. So when I broke down what people were really talking about, it seemed like there were 4 categories that people were using or engaging, with emotion in news. The first one is actually they're looking at the emotion of how something's being written or presented as a way of actually judging trustworthiness, or as a way of really identifying maybe where is the bias or the leaning here that's coming in. So they're using it as an active tool to orient themselves about, can I trust this? But then you also have people who were actively making decisions because they know that the way we write something, the way we present a story has incredible persuasive power. So we had people who were saying that, I refuse to watch any video because I feel I'm much more vulnerable in terms of the persuasiveness if I'm actually watching an event. I will maybe read it, but I will not. So people are very cautious around that as well. But then emotion is also being used for engagement. People who wanted to have that real story and to have that feeling of empathy and emotion, which actually got them to be maybe more public with sharing it because they think more people need to know that this is happening, or even volunteering, changing how they're going to vote, deciding if they're going to wear a mask in public, things like that. So emotion was playing kind of in between this triangle in these three areas.
Willa, I'm just giving you your time reminder.
This is perfect because
Awesome.
So when you guys all go into your breakout groups, we want to dive into a little bit about diverse voices. So this is one person in particular that has a good connection between diverse perspectives and emotion. Klaus was very shocked about Brexit. And it woke him up to the fact that he maybe is not getting an understanding of what other voices are in his community. But when he would try to do that, he was so turned off by the emotion of how that other perspectives were being portrayed to him that he didn't feel like he could engage with it. So he was sort of stuck. But I'm going to kind of pause there and let Charity have a sort of response.
So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Charity Brown, and I am Deputy Editor of Newsroom Product at the Washington Post. And we've been working with Sally Lehrman and the Trust Project for some time now. You have probably seen quite a few of the indicators that were outlined by Willa on the website. And so in terms of
And Charity, do you want me to go ahead and introduce you in a little more depth? I'm happy to. I know you probably aren't going to say all the great things that I think people should know about you.
Absolutely. So, take it away, Sally.
All right, great. Yeah, just not to interrupt your flow or anything, but I want everybody to know that Charity is Deputy Editor of Newsroom Product and Digital News Products at the Washington Post. And she's worked on many things from research and reporting in the financial section to later working in national as digital editor. And now as deputy editor, she really gets this insight across the company and works with folks in engineering, product, legal, finance, customer care, information security, and more to really improve newsroom workflow and provide a better reader experience overall. So she's like the perfect person to be thinking about these issues. And I also want to thank you, Charity, because you have helped us also, and so has the Post more generally, as we work to improve these trust indicators and both the experience for the public and the experience for our news partners. So with that, please talk a bit more about how you've been thinking about this diverse voices. Please go ahead.
Absolutely. So to Sally and Willa's point, Klaus was a very interesting user profile for my group specifically, which our breakout group included a number of journalists and people within the industry who are taking a hard look at how news is being dispensed, how people are processing that news, and then also what type of effect the news is having on them. So to hear this type of feedback from Klaus specifically, that he wanted to be more engaged with gathering as much information as possible, but the way that the news was presented to him was such a turnoff. It really got our wheels turning in terms of my breakout group. You know, how could we figure out a better way to engage this particular type of reader? So there were a few ideas that generated around the room in terms of my breakout group. One of the ideas was to offer multiple perspectives. So, you know, providing, you know, a user would come to a specific article, but there would also be different articles that were tagged high up in the article that will provide a varying view of exactly what the issue was, right? Another person presented an idea about making labels more apparent so that readers know that they're coming to an article and actually that what you're getting in terms of this specific article is a perspective or an opinion or a column. And then also helping them understand what those mean in the news industry, because I'm not sure everyone remembers from social studies in elementary school exactly what those are in terms of definitions, right? So providing them with additional information, maybe some sort of marker on the label to give a bit more detail about, you know, that type of news. I will say that 2020, as you know, was a landmark year just globally. I mean, it was pretty much fueled by three main topics, which, as Willa and Sally noted earlier, were pandemic, protests, and politics. Those were the key areas of coverage for 2020. So specifically for my organization, we try to provide people as much information as possible, but also understanding from this perspective that there is a sense of burnout that comes with providing that information. For instance, the live blogs that we had on a daily basis were available to our readers, and we're giving them details as they were coming in, you know, access to the information that we had at the moment, but really sort of stepping back and wondering how we could present more analysis in terms of those details, or wondering how we could compile all of that information into a larger display. So I think that these type of sessions are so important to the industry as we continue to grow, evolve, and further develop. We want to be attuned to what our readers' needs are. And I think that it's fantastic that the Trust Project is providing that avenue.
Well, thanks, Charity. And what we would like to do is give everybody an opportunity to spend some time with this research and to think about it. So we're going to do like mini workshop groups now, and probably we'll maybe end up with 4 people in a breakout. And we've got a handout that you can pick up, so you don't have, because when you go into your breakout, you won't have this information. But what we'd like you to do is think about Klaus. There's some information about Klaus on that handout. Think about these questions and what kind of that introduction of what you were, what people were saying about their needs for diverse voices. And then we have some questions for you. What has your organization done around diverse perspectives already? Have you heard of an interesting approach? And let that be a quick conversation, because the bulk of it really is, while the interviewees said they seek diverse views, they still seem to live in silos. So how can our diverse voices trust indicator help? How can your own efforts to express more diverse voices on your pages help? Can we help people be more open to different perspectives, lived experiences, and ways of seeing that are different from their own? And then is there a way to map a variety of perspectives right there within the story, kind of to Charity's point, making things available right there on the page? And then the last one is recognizing that we're not always so great at showing diverse voices in our stories. So how can we give opportunities for the public to show us when we're missing some diverse voices that really should be in a story? So let me, while you're having, those groups are being set up, I just put a link to a Google Doc into chat. So if you could be sure and catch that link, because it's not going to, or grab it, because you're not going to be able to access this, I don't think, once you get in your group. And there's a question here, we'll come back to that. Heidi, when we get back, we'll do a Q&A at the end, and people can share their ideas too. So Willa or Charity, do you want to add anything? Or Emily, you want to just go ahead and send everybody out?
I can start some breakout rooms, unless Charity or Willa, we can get started. Awesome.
Yeah, no,
all right, here we go. I'm gonna sort automatically into breakout rooms. Back.
We're back.
It's like an ejector seat.
Yeah, right. So, well, let's just take the last few minutes. If you have any questions of Willa or Charity, or want to continue the conversation, somehow I think please go ahead.
Yeah.
There were a couple questions that popped up in chat if we want to address those first.
Okay.
The first one was, what is the metric Trust uses for the audience engagement / feedback measurements?
So do you mean in the research?
Yeah.
Excel?
If you have a range where people get a score, what is it exactly that you're measuring? Is it just feedback, literally emails from readers? Is it shares of stories? How are you measuring that engagement?
So yeah, it was a qualitative research process. And so we had a couple of ways we did it. One way is actually when I was working with users, they were putting themselves on an engagement scale. So it's how they were actually putting themselves there.
Oh, okay.
And then also it kind of came up in terms of because I had like, how many times a day do you share something? How many times a week do you share something? Who are you sharing it to? And so it was the collection of all of that qualitative work that went into.
Okay. All right, but there's no system by which you're actually taking some kind of traffic measurement of how these stories are getting shared or anything like that. This is all volunteer.
This is a qualitative process.
Okay.
There would be a way to do a quantitative, but it would be and that also would be a much larger
right.
use. Like we'd talk to more than 30 or be tracking more than 30 people.
It was one of the badges, and I wanted to understand deeper how you guys established the measurements for giving these badges in the trust org. That's what
that's a slightly different question. And I'll also say we have done quantitative research separately, which we will be announcing more about that later. But in terms of having the trust mark on your stories, that comes from a commitment that every news organization that is a news partner to the Trust Project makes. So they have to apply to become part of the Trust Project. And we evaluate, like, are you really independent journalism? Are you, do you have public service at your core? And then there are a whole series of other questions, and there's a review group of peers that make that recommendation. Should this organization be part of the Trust Project or not? And then we work with each of the individual news organizations that have applied, and once they're approved to come in, we work with them in cohorts to implement these trust indicators on their pages. So all 8 of those trust indicators have to be on their pages. They have a bunch of individual attributes, like I just mentioned, for diverse voices, having their staff data on their pages, easily acceptable or accessible to the public. And then we launch those sites together. So we'll have a launch coming up in just a couple of weeks where you'll see. And then we do compliance checks. We do a compliance check at the beginning and then over time.
So I have a question directly to that. One of our issues, and I'm sure there are many organizations that share this issue as well, our budget is not something to be proud of. You know what I mean? So posting it could be construed as detrimental. And it's not that we're hiding it because there's nefariousness about it, but it's so small that it calls legitimacy into question. And we're battling that right now in terms of getting accreditation and having to have that be a public arena where they can just come and see, oh, here's where the funding is. We have no problem showing the sources, but the totals can be a little embarrassing. And how are we handling that in terms of this?
Well, that's a common fear that we hear. I mean, small news organizations all the way up to large organizations, if you're talking specifically about diverse voices, don't typically have a good track record. But if you can be more transparent about it, then you start to build credibility and trust. You start to build awareness that, hey, we're trying and we want to get better here. And you can also begin to attract more candidates to jobs so that you can really stand by your word and start building a more inclusive, open, and diverse staff.
Well, I can say just on our front, our staff is incredibly diverse, also enormous, but it's all like 80% volunteer based. And we have staff literally all over the world and different nationalities. And our stream of funding is clear, but not the amounts. And that's what I was getting at. So you're
talking about funding. Well, same thing. We're funding news organizations are nervous about that, but there's a huge concern. Willa can attest to this about the news agenda being perverted or being directed by funders, So if we hide in their eyes our funders, then that just people will fill in their ideas. And
we don't hide the funders, just the amounts.
Well, there again, yeah.
Can't do that because I'm going to be one of those people doing that. Like I published a big index that I'm going to send you, Sean, on everybody in nonprofit news and who owns it and funds it, and then who in mainstream funds it. And it's really important that we know that, so that we don't think Jeff Bezos or John and Linda Henry affect the Washington Post or the Globe newsrooms. In fact, they've shown to be incredibly church and state, but we need to know who to hold accountable.
Right. Yeah.
So that we can watch for that. Like that's our job as journalists, is to be watchdogs. If we can't watch our own house, how do we expect to hold everybody else accountable?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where INN's been amazing, and Sally's work's been amazing.
Oh, thank you. And I believe we're out of time, right, Emily? Because we're actually into the quarter after the hour, so we want to give you a chance to take a break. But thank you for your time, for sticking with us. I think a lot of people got nervous about the workshopping of diversity. This happens sometimes, especially when that's the topic, unfortunately. So thank you for the conversation. It was really interesting. And I want to thank Charity and Willa for your contributions. Really, really helpful and beautiful presentations and thoughtful. So thank you.